It's an honor to be the first speaker in these Seed Valley talks and to discuss with you what makes plants healthy, how can they defend themselves. And it's framed in the pandemic that we are all experiencing now as humans, but also that is coming towards us if we look at plants. So how do plants defend themselves? And a reasonable question would then be, if plants can defend themselves, can they also be vaccinated? So to get to that answer, I would like to take you through how plants can defend themselves and to compare that with what happens in humans. Pandemic experiences now, we have learned a lot more about the human immune system. Humans have an immune system that is a dedicated set of cells in your bloodstream, in this case the white blood cells, that will recognize a pathogen and they will take care of it. Either they will destroy it immediately, or they will prepare antibodies that make sure that this pathogen will disappear. They also have a memory. And this is where vaccination comes in, because we can build up this memory and make sure that we can cope with these enemies in the future. So, is that the same for plants? Well, actually, no. Plants do not have a circulating immune system. Actually, every plant cell, or virtually every plant cell, can defend itself. And you can see that in this picture nicely, because here you have a picture of a plant cell that is being attacked by a fungus. You see a very nice blue thread, which is a fungus, that is connecting to a single cell, and this cell in this picture is brown, and it's actually responding to this fungus. It's raising its defenses, and you can stain that and see that here. So this fungus is recognized in the plant, the individual plant cell is responding. In the end, it will mean that this cell will sacrifice itself and prevent the fungus from being successful. So this means that we have a very cell-specific, a very unique response in every plant cell. And if the plant cell responds, but the fungus is still there, then the next cell and the next cell and the next cell will try to keep this fungus at bay. And you can see that in leaves as brown spots or brown patches, or even in a plant as a brown branch, because that is also what sets plants apart from humans. We cannot lose our arm to get rid of a virus and then grow a new arm. A plant can. So it has a different strategy. It can also lose a piece of its tissue to survive. And if the plant keeps up, the plant will survive. But if the pathogen is faster, and that's the example in the background with the bananas, then the pathogen will grow, and the plant will not keep up, and finally this plant will die. So, in a sense, the plant has to keep up with the pathogen. So if there is a local infection, how can the plant be sure that the rest of the plant is aware of what is coming? And to that end, it turns out that single cells that recognize a certain pathogen will give off a signal that is transported through the plant. So the next leaf will already be activated. It will even be resistant, and we call that systemic acquired resistance. So it's transported through the plants. And there are different chemicals that are transported that will activate cells. It's a very rough signal because it only distinguishes between bacteria, viruses and fungi on the one hand, and insects on the other hand. So it's a rough signal, but it already prepares the plant for what is to come. So you could call this a little bit immunization or even vaccination, but it's the plant itself that does that. It recognizes the pathogen, and then it raises the alert in other parts of the plant. It's also called priming, which not necessarily has to be done by the same pathogen, it can also be done by other microbes. And the plant is prepared for what is coming. So yes, the plant has an opportunity to already be prepared. But that is depending on the pathogen it's recognizing. So the recognition is 1, the signal is 2, and then actually the plant has to kill its enemy, or it has to repel its enemy. And for that, a plant has a plethora of chemicals. Plants make all kinds of chemicals. Sometimes we appreciate them because they taste well, but these chemicals can keep away insects, fungi, And this is what the plant at the end does. It generates a lot of different compounds, and the list that I'm showing here is merely a snapshot, but plants are good at defending themselves. And this is old school, because 5 years ago, approximately, I was really baffled by the fact that plants do things differently. Colleagues in Wageningen University, but all over the world, people starting to realize that plants not only produce these chemicals, but they also produce signals based on RNA. You may have heard of RNA in the Pfizer vaccine. This is a different kind of RNA, but it's also genetic material. And this genetic material is made by the plant, packaged into small packages, and then transported to a pathogen to finally kill it or to inhibit its growth. A very weird phenomena, which turns out to be very effective. So not only these chemicals, but also specific signals can be created. And I find that very exciting because it means that a plant can also target a very specific pathogen. And the first discoveries were made with fungi, but later it turned out that plants also make these small RNAs to target insects, but also to target viruses. Because in the end, it's the same mechanism. A small RNA is imported into the cell of the enemy, and this small RNA will disturb the action of one or several specific genes. So it's a very specific defense system. And you may even think, oh, is this something that you could use for vaccination? Because these small RNAs, you can make them specific for any pathogen. So we're currently trying to find out whether that works. And the big issue is, how do you get these RNAs at the spot that you would like to use them? Some people make genetically modified plants. Maybe you can spray them, or you can even use microorganisms to get there. But this is something we still have to investigate, and we're not sure whether this will be working or whether it will be safe at all. So vaccination with double-stranded RNA, with small RNA, may be a future opportunity. But there is an option that is already being used, which is like vaccination. In this case, a weakened virus, a Pepino mosaic virus, a very weak strain that causes any symptom at all. If you spray this on a tomato plant in a greenhouse, and this is a product that you can actually buy, this plant will become resistant against aggressive Pepino mosaic virus. So that you might call vaccination. And the mechanism behind it looks very much like the mechanism I described before, based on these small RNAs. So the answer to our question is already, we can vaccinate that. But will this work is still an open question. Will it be applicable is an open question. Especially if you would go to the field. Because plants in the field experience much more than just pathogen stress. Light may be different, sunny day, temperature may be different. If temperatures rise, things become completely different. If the plant does not have any energy because of the situation it's growing in, it may be different. But most of all, plants will experience different attackers at the same time. It will have to recognize them and then choose which defense mechanism it has to use. So in the field, things are much more complicated. And how can a plant recognize these different pathogens? For that, we have to look into the genes of the plant. And it turns out that plants have an enormous collection of receptor proteins, proteins that can perceive something. They can perceive general signals, like chitin, which is the wall of a fungus, or flagellin, which belongs to bacteria. And they can recognize very specific pathogens as well. So it has these tools, these proteins, encoded by genes. And these genes are often also essential for resistance, and therefore called resistance genes, or they are essential for susceptibility, and called susceptibility genes. So plants have that. And they differ, again, they differ from humans in that. If you look into the human genome, so my genome, for instance, I only have a handful of genes that directly help me to defend myself against a pathogen. any plant species, you would look into its genetic information, you would get hundreds of them. Even if you would look into a species and look at all the richness there, you would find thousands of these genes that make the plant able to recognize a pathogen and respond to it. So, in that sense, plants have a different system than we have. We use antibodies that can be made at will. Plants have a genetic makeup that makes them flexible. And a specific example I would like to give here is that you can find these traits, these defense traits, in the wild. The picture here shows you leaf hairs of a tomato plant. Wild tomato plants have a lot of leaf hairs. They produce all kinds of chemicals to protect the tomato plant against insects. So if a wild tomato species has these kind of defenses, why not use them? Well, because we have domesticated our tomato plant to be suitable for our cultivation and for our taste, much of these defenses have been removed. And you can see another cultivated tomato on this picture where the insects will flourish. So there's a lot to learn from the wild species with regard to defenses. And with that sense, we can answer, or I can answer at least part of the question that I've asked, can plants be vaccinated? Maybe to your surprise, at least to mine it was, yes, plants can be vaccinated, but can we apply that? That's a different world. What we do and what we can do is to look at the genetic diversity to protect the plants against pathogens by using what is available from the wild. What you see behind me is a tomato. It still has its old defense systems. I would never eat it, but it has defense systems that we can learn from. So, if my story has interested you, then maybe you would like to stick around and also listen to how self-defense of plants actually works and how you can use that in generating resilient crops.